Greetings to everyone. Thank you all for being here. I really want to reiterate my true thanks and gratitude for all of you who spend the time to be here every Sunday, and many of you who are across the great expanse of the ocean where it's a funky time of the day that you still make it happen to be here with us. So thank you all very much for being here with me. Today, I believe I'm going to have to put on my wizard cap. This is a wizard cap day. The things that we're going to be discussing today are, I have fallen in love with my news feeds because I'm telling you now, every single day there's something new that blows my mind. It really reiterates that whatever you think all of this is about, you're wrong, because it's not a thinking process that creates all of this. It's this part trying to grok what this part is creating moment by moment. This part is trying to understand it and wrap its mind around it. And the only way you can wrap your mind around it is for this mind to completely blow open in the attempt. And having my small mind blow open is one of my favorite things to do. And I assume it's a really fun thing for many other people to do too, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But what I see in the news feeds is constantly forcing me to rewire my brain patterns and encompass completely new ideas about what I had thought all of this was about. Just remember that that's all superimposed on the experiences that I've had in my life and I have quite a story. I'm 76 now, so I was an artist going to art school in Boston at the height of the 60s. So just grok the concept of what massive change in consciousness took place in the 60s, and to have been part of that, right smack dab in the middle of it, as an artist and as a musician and a composer. This was long before the concept of becoming a holistic doctor was ever born. This was the fermenting of awakening to the true nature of reality through the use of sacred medications that have been used for thousands of years in various cultures. Mushrooms and LSD and peyote and mescaline, things like that, as sacraments that you would prepare for, that you would search out a place in the world that was a beatific place, that was a safe place for you to go and have this experience, and you would plan it weeks in advance. It wasn't a spur of the moment thing during a party where you're drunk and stoned to drop some acid. Those people is who the media pointed their cameras at and called them hippies. The real cutting edge root of the explosion of consciousness that has resulted in what we see today as a global rising of an awareness and an awareness in a large section of the scientific community that is making weekly discoveries about the nature of reality, particularly once it cracked through the wall of the periodic table into the quantum realm and began to see the insanity of the quantum realm rules that that are the mirror image of the rules that are apparent out here in the macro world, where everything seems to be sane, where mathematics sort of rules and the rules of Newton seem to work, and apples fall from trees, and gravity does its thing, and we can calculate with great precision the trajectory of the orbits of planets around suns and things like that. But once you get into the quantum realm and begin exploring what's going on down there, you realize that all of this facade on this side of the wall of the periodic table, where the atoms form compounds, the compounds form elements, and those things form bodies and people and things that we see around us, and they all behave in certain mathematical ways that we can predict. This sort of sanity world is based on a scaffolding of insane principles to the mind that is used to this world. Those principles on that other side of the wall, you just throw the whole deck of cards in the air, and you have to release something really big in yourself to grok what the meaning of all that is. And the concepts that are being discovered there are, like I continually say, not new concepts. They're concepts that have been discussed at great length by some of the most ancient philosophers and meditators and spiritual people in the world. The ones that have survived, particularly in India, with 4,000-year-old texts in Sanskrit, and in China, 5,000-year-old texts of the I Ching, discuss the nature of reality as if it sounds like it's coming from Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicists. It's such a deep connection of principles that it's sort of like science discovers God, kind of a thing. So, in particular, the last few weeks, the various things that I have discussed in previous episodes are now coming home to root with these new discoveries that are coming forth that we'll be discussing today. First and foremost, let's, the world truly is a strange and a wonderful place. The deeper you go, the stranger it and the more wonderful it gets. The conversations that I've had just last week on the homogeneous nature of fractal math spanning the space between the quantum field and the cosmos, and how they're all put together, and including how that reflects itself in our own conscious processing in our brains, the network of how it all fits together in micro and macro scales. It's like we've broken through into the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. So if you don't know who this is, it's one of the first surrealist films that came out in the 1920s. And the set designs were all really crazy. These pictures on the side here were the set designs for that film made in the 1920s. But Dr. Caligari, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, was this fantastical place where whatever you thought the rules were of ordinary reality, they were completely thrown asunder. Once you step through the doorway into the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, then all bets were completely off, and you're in a completely different realm where you don't know what is going to happen, that nothing seems to make sense. Even the walls are weird and strange. The only thing in this room that looks normal is the bookcase. But if you look, the books are weird too. They're like sticking out of panels, and the whole film was like this. So I encourage you all to look this up on YouTube and watch this crazy film from the 20s. It's a silent film. What are quantum mechanics? I don't know. People who repair quantums, I suppose. Let's see. Got to get this thing back on. So, yeah, it's whatever you think this is all about, your brain will be torn asunder soon. Um, Remember we talked about quantum foam? It was a couple of episodes ago. Nothing doesn't exist. Instead, there is quantum foam. Well, just think about that sentence for a second. Nothing doesn't exist. That uh, when you combine uncertainty principle with Einstein's famous equation, you get a mind-blowing result. Particles can come from nothing, and they do it all the time. Uh, if quantum physicists are to be believed in the quantum foam at the smallest place that we've been able to find or measure or think of or imagine in the universe, down at the Planck length scale, particles are popping in and out of existence in this foam. It's a intense, highly energetic field of foamy bubbles that are popping in and out, and like boiling water. If you look closely at a pan of boiling water, you'd see bubbles and bubbles and bubbles coming up and popping, and new bubbles coming and popping, and that is what it looks like. That's what it's like at the root of the smallest of the small, where there's this foamy texture of bubbles that are coming in and out of existence, popping all the time. The concept of nothing has been debated for millennia by both scientists and philosophers. Even if you took an empty container devoid of all matter and cooled it to absolute zero, there is still something in the container. That something is called quantum foam, and it represents particles blinking into and out of existence. Not the kind of thing you see in this macro world. However, you do see it periodically, every once in a while. For instance, the concept of spontaneous remission. You've got an inoperable brain tumor in the center of your brain, and the next minute it's gone. It's popped out of existence, into and out of existence. And the person involved has had a transformational experience of consciousness simultaneous to that. It didn't just kind of come and everybody's surprised. The person who had it happen to them went through a massive inner transformational experience. And the person who came out the other end is not the person who came into it. Or a person who came into it is now minus a bunch of baggage that has revealed the real person that was there all along, who is sort of in jail. So, as we discussed a few weeks ago, this concept of the deepest and the smallest of the small, where this quantum foam is bubbling in and out, as the foundation of everything that there is also expressed in the large expanse of the biggest structures that we see in the cosmos itself, where many universes could be constantly exploding at every point in space. So it's the foam at the Planck scale is represented in the macro scale in foam in the macro largest scale of the universe that you can imagine. Now, we can't see it from when we look out with even the James Webb telescope. It's too much bigger than that. When you look at a whole picture of the largest scale that they so far have of a picture of the universe with all the stars that are smashed and clustered together. Bear in mind that we're only seeing a tiny, tiny, tiny little speck of a percentage of what the universe as a whole really is. We can't see beyond a certain point because it takes light too long to get there. Our universe is just an expanding bubble in another dimension. Mind melting study says. This is the newest of the new. Our universe is just an expanding bubble in another dimension. So each one of these bubbles is a universe of its own. And these bubbles are all connected and networked together where periodically one bubble will meet another bubble and create a plane of connection. And that plane of connection becomes a new thing all of itself. So you can kind of, there have been thought experiments that try to describe what a one-dimensional being who lives on a sheet of paper would see if a three-dimensional, actually a two-dimensional being that lives on a sheet of paper who has only X and Y. They don't have Z. They just have X and Y. And a three-dimensional object like a sphere comes down and hits this plane. And the first thing that the beings on the two-dimensional plane would see is a dot would appear. And the dot would all of a sudden turn into a circle as the sphere starts to penetrate through this flat plane. And the dot would turn to a circle. The circle would start getting larger and larger and larger in diameter. It would reach a maximum, and then it would come back and down and turn into a dot again as the sphere exits the plane. So if you can extrapolate that one step more, where we are now three-dimensional beings being penetrated by structures of a higher dimension in the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension penetrating into our universe, what would we see? What kind of structures would we see, right? And according to some of these theories, these bubbles are expanding and contracting. Some are expanding and popping. In some cases, a higher dimension would penetrate the bubble of our three dimensions, and instead of a dot, we would see an explosion, like a Big Bang explosion. And that Big Bang explosion would start to expand, just the same way that the dot turns into a circle that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Fractal bubbles, unraveling the mysteries of the cosmic tapestry. So what this is getting into is that the quantum foam at the smallest of the small is reflected as quantum foam in the cosmic scale, where there's quantum foam where universes of bubbles meet one another. And as those bubbles meet and form connections, that forms a new plane, and that plane of connection is what many of these articles we're going to see are pointing to as the new understanding in science about what our universe is. Our universe is the place where two universal bubbles meet and form a new plane. A daring new theory has been put forth by Swedish physicists to explain the long-standing enigma of the expansion of the universe. In other words, as one bubble penetrates the other, and the dot becomes a circle, and the circle gets larger and larger. In this case, a higher dimensional plane penetrating ours would be a dot that forms a sphere, and the sphere gets larger and larger. In other words, the expansion of our whole universe as a bubble. They opine that the actual nature of our universe may be that of a bubble positioned between other five-dimensional spaces. Despite its complexity, this idea presents a novel viewpoint on the nature of the universe and its expansion. This concept that there's an infinite number of these universe-sized bubbles that are interacting in a super macro scale quantum foam, and that many of those are popping in and out of existence. But the popping in and out of existence is, from our standpoint, super duper slow-mo. That this popping in and out of existence in a quantum field at a Planck length from our time scale would be so infinitesimally short a period of time that you couldn't actually film it or see it. That the large-scale, universal scale of quantum foam popping in and out of existence would take hundreds of billions of years for the pop, which would be the whole lifespan of all life in the universe as we know it from start to finish. The universe on the edge of a bubble in a five-dimensional space-time. That's what we're talking about. So wrap your mind around that one. that when you look at a soap bubble that you blow a soap bubble and the bubble gets big. And the only the only thing that is, quote, real about this bubble is the surface tension area. Outside the bubble is air. Inside the bubble is air. The bubble itself is that thin membrane with the sort of multicolored swirls that are kind of moving around it. That thin membrane is what the bubble is. And according to these theories, that's us. That on a universe-sized bubble, we exist into that thin membrane. But when you're dealing with universal scales, the thinness of that membrane is immensely large. It appears to our time scale, our size scale, to be immensely thick. So thick that it's hundreds of millions of light years that we wouldn't be able to see the edges of. In the vast tapestry of the universe, a captivating theory emerges, unveiling the hidden patterns that shape our reality. The fractal bubble theory, a symphony of interconnectedness, proposes that everything in the cosmos is composed of repeating patterns of fractal bubbles, from the subatomic level to the cosmic scale. These intricate structures hold the key to understanding the very fabric of our existence. I've mentioned in the past that the theory of Terence Witt, who wrote a book called The Null Universe, where he explained that the only mathematical value that has eternity and infinity and no beginning and no end is the concept of zero, nothing. And then if you remember, there's two sides of the equation, zero and zero, infinitely complex zero and simple zero. And infinitely complex zero is every mathematical way that zero can relate to itself mathematically to equal zero. So 0 plus 0, 0 minus 0, 0 square root of zeros, arrays of 0, all equal 0. So the mathematical relationships of 0 to itself is the something that pops out of nothing. The relationships mathematically is something, and that something is this. This is what nothing looks like in the infinitely complex side of that equation. And that means that that equal sign is the process of transformation from infinitely complex zero to the simple zero state, the process of dying, a process of death, where you exit this one and you enter the other one, and they're equal to each other. You're still you. You just, and all of this is perhaps still here, but it's a concept and an ideal and a construction that doesn't have, it's freely malleable. Just like this is, if we could get to the right place in our consciousness to change what this is, that's the problem. And that's what people have been struggling with since time immemorable. That when you have these transformational experiences in super high states of meditation or taking sacred alkaloid medications, you have an experience where you realize that all of this is a projection of consciousness. And now quantum physicists are saying the same thing, that there's no objective reality at all, that consciousness is a requirement for reality to exist. Up until the moment where consciousness arrives on the scene to witness whatever is going to happen, nothing happens. Everything is in a potential state to happen, and an infinite plane of anything that could happen has all got a level playing field. But when consciousness arrives on the scene, it comes with an agenda that it believes that reality looks this way, so that creates the path of least resistance that reality is constantly looking for to save energy, because it's an ecological system. Don't waste energy. I just provided the path of least resistance to save energy by my expectation that this is what reality looks like. Perhaps, that this is what reality looks like, and I'm dying of an inoperable brain tumor, and there's nothing anybody can do. And something about that experience galvanizes my emotions and drives me to a place in my consciousness that's deep enough where I can confront the next moment and reject that idea from a powerful, deep and under the hood place of consciousness, big mind, and decide to have a different expectation about what the next moment is going to be, and bang, that tumor is gone. And the doctors are scratching their heads wondering, maybe we were looking at the wrong x-rays, It's, so that's the beauty and the promise of the technologies that we see in the 21st century have now given us the precision level of tools to observe what happens in the brain with sophisticated equipment when you're in these super high states where that kind of thing might happen. And also the concept of advanced forms of brainwave entrainment to entrain your brainwaves to any pattern we wish. So we could entrain your brainwaves to these patterns where people accomplish the impossible as training wheels. You can't explain to somebody how do you get into a super high meditation state. You just have to do it. It's brute force. But with entrainment, we can take your consciousness there and sit you right into the middle of it as a visceral experience. So now you can begin to understand what nobody could explain to you, what it's like to be in this place. And then if you can do that on a regular basis and practice it, like going to a gym, you can strengthen the muscle of being in that state of consciousness until you can make it your own without the training wheels. In essence, that's the core of what we're here doing in these live streams, where there's power in numbers. And quantum physics already shows us that there's entanglement and that there's the 100th monkey idea, that a minimum quantum number of people thinking the same thought makes that thought come true. But thinking a thought before a thought is what that's all about. That's what the kahunas in Hawaii. God grants all prayers. Therefore, my present experience is what I prayed for in the past. Prayer happens before a thought. It's not here. It's deep in here somewhere, in an indefinable place. And what happens deep enough in here is the cosmic fractal holographic connection with everything, where when we see at the smallest of the smallest of the small this concept of quantum foam, and then we explode our perspective into the largest structures in the universe that we can imagine, we get quantum foam at the large scale, where there's bubbles popping in and out of existence at a super slow motion state, from our standpoint, of the universe filled with bubble universes all interacting with each other. And what stands dead center in between those two scales is us. That one thing that was the mind blower for me when I was reading Terrence Witt's book is he's describing that a certain mathematical axioms. If you have an infinite universe that has no end and has no beginning, that it gets infinitely smaller and smaller and smaller and never stops, and it gets infinitely larger and larger and larger and never stops. That halfway between those two extremes is always me and my conscious perception of reality. I always stand 100% dead center at the crux point of balance of infinitely large and infinitely small, right? The halfway point will always be me, me here in my consciousness. And that means that from what these guys are saying with the fractal bubble theory, that a symphony of interconnectedness proposes that everything in the cosmos is composed of repeating patterns of fractal bubbles. What I alluded to last time, that means that there's a quantum foam of consciousness here in the middle as a repeating fractal pattern of the infinitely large and infinitely small. And from the standpoint of the ancients' understanding and the quantum physicists' understanding in the present day, that consciousness itself creates the universe moment by moment through its expectation, that all of these patterns of quantum foam and fractal holograms and all the rest of it, the origin of it all is here in my consciousness, that exhibits itself and projects itself to all the extremes we can imagine, to penetrate into the extremes of the small and the extremes of the large, and the extremes of time and the extremes of space. That we are seeing the external projections of the inner processes of consciousness itself. That means that ideas are popping in and out of existence in the quantum foam of consciousness and being projected through holographic projections and fractal repeating into the infinitely small and the infinitely large in massive, gigantic superposition of the present moment that enfolds all past and future events. Put that hat on, try to fit it. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, As we delve into the mathematical underpinnings of this theory, we encounter the awe-inspiring concept of self-similarity and scaling laws. Like a cosmic dance, these mathematical principles guide the formation and evolution of fractal bubbles, creating a symphony of energy and matter that reverberates throughout the cosmos. Self-similarity and self-scaling. right? That means that the repetitive patterns in the quantum foam at the Planck scale is repeated exactly in the biggest macro scales that you can imagine, and is a property of consciousness itself, a sort of a quantum foam of consciousness, all of it linked mathematically together in the way that we see fractal patterns repeat forever. And they're holographic and 3D and 4D and 5D and 10D and 11D and whatever. Quantum breakthrough. Scientists rethink the nature of reality. Duh. And check this out. This is Hiroshima University, where the bomb was dropped. I mean, how crazy is that? Wow. Quantum physicists from Hiroshima University have revealed that the results of quantum measurements are fundamentally tied to the interaction dynamics between the measuring device and the system, challenging traditional views of fixed physical properties and suggesting that reality is shaped by the context of these interactions. Their findings point to a need to rethink the interpretation of quantum experimental data. I've said this before in previous broadcasts, probably a couple of years ago, that the act of observing changes the observed, that it throws into question the true core, truthful reality that is being revealed through rigorous scientific investigation. The concept of the double-blind study. The results of double-blind studies, if you can keep it pure and not have scientists who are fudging the details so they can get grant money for their favorite idea, or universities playing hanky-panky with the data so that they get funding for the university. The real stuff, where we have a double-blind study with Group A who gets the real pill, and Group B who gets the sugar pill, and Group C who is the control group and gets nothing. Double-blind means that the doctor who's passing out pills doesn't know which pills are what either. That's the double-blind. But what's not being taken into account is the quantum nature under the hood that drives all of these macro systems in the regular world of scientific labs and equipment and lab coats and doctors who think that they're towing the line of a valid scientific study, because the doctor who doesn't know which pills are what is quantum connected through entanglement to all the other scientists and doctors in the other room who do know, and who this person is deeply connected with because they're with them every single day in their workspace. And some of them have social interactions and get to know these people really well. As soon as you touch consciousness with another person, you're entangled. Even if you touch once, you're entangled. That entanglement deepens and deepens, gets more connected the deeper you know someone. So therefore, at a quantum field level, the quantum effects of entanglement under the hood, where this person is not aware, deeply knows which pill is what. There's no way to screen for that. It's going to mean that the results of that test are going to be a certain percentage true in the macro world only, but not in the quantum world, where everything is mixed up together and affects each other at a deep core level. So this concept of the act of observing changes the observed throws the entire mix of objective scientific measurement out the window from a quantum standpoint. It would mean that you would have to now take into account the scientist observing the experiment as influencing the results of that experiment, which is never taken into account, those kind of things. The quantum foam. Scientists have proven that consciousness is the basis of our physical reality. We've witnessed it appear from nowhere at the quantum border that separates mind and matter, and we've recorded our personal awareness affecting the outcome of experiments at this level. So this border that separates mind and matter is the counterpart of one bubble meeting another, that the plane where the two touch and forms a new pattern, that plane has an existence itself. We see the counterpart of that in the borderline brainwave states that we've been experimenting with for 30 years. The borderline between beta and alpha at around 13 hertz. That place where beta slows down and then beta stops and alpha begins at around 13 hertz is a state of its own. And even though we in the past have never quite paid any attention to it, never noticed that it might be a thing of its own, once you start paying attention to it, you realize that it's got dimension and thickness, and it's a place of its own. It's a state of consciousness of its own. And if you remember, the borderline between beta and alpha is where prodigy kids show maximum brain activity in a huge research project with high IQ kids. So that zone has got to do with intelligent quotient, brain power, brain processing power. And that means that if we could entrain your brainwaves to that borderline state, we should be able to increase the power of your mind, your IQ. We should be able to boost your IQ. Be a pretty simple experiment to do. But from the smallest of the small of the quantum foam to the largest of the large of the cosmic patterns of quantum foam, always in the middle stands us here in the center. Consciousness itself is generating these principles. And ideas are popping in and out of existence in a quantum foam of the mind. And instantly, through fractal holographic projection, projecting those patterns into the super small and the super large in one giant homogeneous whole, which means that the grand cosmic foam of the cosmic and the quantum foam of the quantum is also thinking. It's also consciousness expressing the same way it's happening in our brain. It's one gigantic cosmic chord. It's music, simultaneously playing in all scales of time and space, where space planes and time planes come together in our local consciousness inside of our, reflected in our brain patterns that we can measure. And this place where my sense of time and my sense of space come together seems familiar to me. It's what we talked about before. It's the default mode network, the 4 zones of the brain, the frontal zone, the occipital zone, and the 2 temporal parietal zones that are highly synchronized up together, these 4 zones, exhibiting the slowest brainwave pulse ever measured by science. 1 brain pulse every 10 to 20 seconds. And this represents the default mode network, the network of these four zones, highly synchronized together, forming the default mode function of the brain. So 95% of all brain function is this default mode under the hood, churning experience and digesting experience, and I believe is the grand quantum reality generator. It's generating the next moment from now. And floating on top of that giant ocean is the 5% of me up here thinking that what I experience is the whole 100%. No, not so. And as I said just last week, that has, this quantum 95% under the hood is reflected in the macro universe in dark matter and dark energy, which make up 95% of the universe that we can't see, and 5% floating on the top is this macro world that is measured by Newtonian physics. We think this is the whole thing, and this is just 5%. All the interactions of chemistry and the periodic table and biology and the cosmos and stars and all that is only 5%. Material universe. 95% is under the hood, this dark energy, dark matter. And it's in a certain percentage mix, which leads me to believe there's another pattern that it's so obvious that dark matter, dark energy, 95% and 5% off the top is so deeply connected with the default mode network, which is 95% under the hood, invisible, and 5% off the top is everything I think is so. That it means that the default mode network will probably be discovered to have two components that are similar to the relationships or percentages of dark matter, dark energy, right? Well, the dark matter was 68% dark energy and 27% dark matter. Dark matter contracts and holds things together, and dark energy expands and pushes things apart. There's got to be something very similar to that inside the under the hood default mode functioning of my brain itself, because all of this stuff is connected and reflective of each other. Once you understand that principle, you begin to make predictions that almost always come true once you're just reiterating the patterns you're seeing. Doesn't mean you're necessarily psychic or anything. The cosmos may have existed forever, according to a revolutionary model that extends Einstein's theory of general relativity using quantum correction terms, so to speak. By taking into consideration dark matter and energy, the model can concurrently address a number of concerns. So this is part of the talk I've had quite a number of times, that I've never really bought the idea of the Big Bang because you can't tell what was before the Big Bang. I can accept the idea of a big oscillation where something reaches its peak and comes to its minimum, or reaches its peak and comes to its minimum in an oscillation. So every time it crunches down and we have some kind of explosion thing, it could be similar to sonoluminescence, where two sound waves meet each other and create a bubble that collapses and creates an explosion of light. Sound creating light and electromagnetism. That may be what it is. The giant tone of the universe, the vibration, the infinite frequency. The quantum equation suggests that the Big Bang never happened and that the universe has no beginning. Duh. The world, once again, is a strange and wonderful place. Quantum mechanics is very worthy of regard, but an inner voice tells me that this is not yet the right track. The theory yields much, but it hardly brings us closer to the old one's secrets. I, in any case, am convinced that he does not play dice. God does not play dice with the universe. That when presented with the next moment from now, which is an infinite field of all possibilities, what chooses which of those realities is going to be the one that comes next in the next moment? And the scientific community said, well, it's random. And Einstein said, no, God doesn't play dice with the universe. And the ancient texts and what we see on the quantum research shows us this is most likely true, that why is the next moment for now a continuation of this moment with me talking and you hearing me? Why does this all persist throughout time? Because we're expecting it to be this way. We think that this is what reality looks like. Therefore, this is what we get. If we could change ourselves and our idea at the corest, deepest part of ourselves and our consciousness, the next moment could be anything. It wouldn't have to be populated with books on shelves and a piano and stuff and a body that has 5 fingers. It could be anything in any dimension. So that's the power of being able to add motes of consciousness together and align them precisely and scientifically into a state of meditation where all of us come together. Brain entrainment, live stream mind link ideas. That's what we're up to here. Crazy, impossible, weirdo scientific experiment into consciousness, creating reality. You are the universe expressing itself as a human for a little while. At the core of it all is a place from which all things extend out. And all the things that extend out, no matter how big or how small they get, or in what timescales they flow, are all fractal reflections of this central thing, this mote of consciousness in the deepest core of ourselves, from which the newest of the new of creative ideas about what reality could be spring forth from. So, with that being said, time for headphones. This soundtrack, this soundtrack is a default mode network zone where we get sense of self on the inside of my skin versus sense of self on the outside of my skin, and we synchronize those together and get my normal sense of self, my normal sense of time. Time and space is defined in this place, and it's under the hood and it's before a thought. This is a pretty deep soundtrack, particularly at the beginning. So be prepared for how this one starts and progresses. So here we go. As usual, I will leave these live stream going for a while so that people can converse together in the chat. So once again, peace and blessings to all of you. Thank you all very much for being here. Have a good week, and I'll see you next week.